Hey, what's going on, guys? Hopefully you enjoyed the comedy show before, because I'm a programmer. You don't want to hear my jokes. Okay. Why do all programmers need glasses? Because they can't see sharp. Thank you. I'll be here all day. So welcome to my speech on the next generation of safer cross-chain bridges and why all bridges still suck. So first, a little bit about me. My name is Daniel Lumi. I'm a researcher and consultant working in L2s, privacy, and DAOs. So today we'll be talking about what is the current designs for cross-chain bridges. How do we improve those and make a next-gen design? How are L2s better than any cross-chain bridge? And then steps we can take to improve essentially any kind of bridge. So why this talk? I'm actually in the ETH ecosystem, so I don't like bridges. That should tell you a lot. But I do think we'll live in a world with many chains. And if we do live in that world, we definitely need better bridges than we currently have. And just to illustrate this, in 2022, of all of the hacks, essentially 69% of the hacks accounted for bridge hacks. And that was about $2 billion lost in real capital. And examples of this are the Axie Infinity Bridge, the Nomad Bridge, the Solana Wormhole Bridge. And here's sort of our current categories of bridges. You don't have to look too closely at it yet. We'll keep coming back to this. The point of it is you have a spectrum of trust, from trust the human to trust the code. And within those categories, we have two types of bridges. One is wrapped asset bridges, the other is liquidity provider bridges. And again, it's a spectrum of trust. Wrapped asset bridges, you have to trust forever. For liquidity provider bridges, you have to trust while the money's in transport. And so here's sort of our current generation of cross-chain bridge designs. We have custodial bridges, where one actor essentially chooses what are the legitimate cross-chain transfers, they custody the assets, and they complete those. We also have multisig, where multiple parties come to an agreement on what is the canonical state or these legitimate transactions. And then we also have optimistic fraud-proof-based bridges. This is similar to like an optimistic L2. Essentially, all transactions are trusted to be true until someone spots some fraud in there and they go through a challenge period on essentially proving that it's not a legitimate transaction. So right now, here's where we're at. Multisig and custodial as well as optimistic, they bridge funds. Cool. With optimistic bridges, you also kind of don't have to trust the state because there's the fraud-proof period. The reality, though, is still multisig. We'll get back to this. So here's the next generation of cross-chain bridge designs. And these sort of break down into two. One is a light client bridge, which is native to the protocol, and the other one is a ZK bridge. ZK is very hot right now, so ZK everything. And examples of native light clients are IBC. Examples of ZK bridges are, for example, ZK IBC, which a lot of different projects are working on right now. And just to get you excited on light clients, Satoshi actually had a whole section on light clients in the white paper. He didn't talk about bridging, but there was actually a section on light clients. And so what is a light client? So in a normal blockchain, you essentially need to download the entire history of the blockchain, re-execute every single transaction, and then you know Daniel has 1 ETH, right? With light clients, you essentially just download the latest state, and you can see, okay, Daniel now has 1 ETH. And he doesn't have to, you don't have to re-execute every single transaction before that. And so how do light clients actually apply to bridges, right? So essentially, again, we can just check the latest state. So instead of having to stick all of Ethereum on Solana to have a trustless bridge, it still wouldn't be trustless, we can essentially just submit the latest state. Daniel bridged 1 ETH to this bridge contract and wants it on, well, I would not want it on Solana, but you get the point. So the first type of light client is native light clients, right? And some chains already support it, like Cosmos chains. And essentially with this, you have minimal trust assumptions outside of consensus, right? Don't tell Cosmos people consensus is the whole trust assumption in bridges, but very good bridge. Essentially, Ethereum will also have light clients with some statelessness and vertical trees and actually making Ethereum ZK on the base layer. Coming soon, TM. We'll talk in 15 years. ZK light clients, or ZK bridges, or proof of consensus, we like our acronyms in this space, essentially are a chain agnostic way of making a bridge, ZK bridge for light client bridge for any chain. Essentially, you can make a ZK proof of the state of any other chain and submit it onto another one. You do need to build it separately for every single type of VM, and that's not great because these are complex circuits, but it works with any type of protocol, essentially. So here's the benefits of light client bridges. Essentially, the user can force through a transaction. So if the nodes or the bridge multisig starts censoring you, you can actually push your own transaction through and get it on the other side. So you don't have to trust for that part, you don't have to trust the relayers. Also for like unlike optimistic, multisig, and custodian, you don't really have to worry about the state truth, because if someone's able to make a ZK proof, they can't lie. Like if they made it, it's the truth. That's a huge asterisk though, and we'll come back to that on the next one, right? And it is better latency than optimistic bridges. You don't have to wait 3 hours a week to send the funds. So the problems with light client bridges is essentially you might have a ZK proof of one chain on the other chain, right? So now Solana knows the state of ETH, right? No, because essentially you need to know which is the correct state of Ethereum. Ethereum forks just naturally, fairly regularly. Polygon forks a lot regularly. Or I could just like, if I was a hacker, I could literally just copy Ethereum on my computer and double spend over and over again and be like, I have 1,000,000 ETH and try to bridge that. So the other chain needs to actually check what is the real state of Ethereum, right? You still have, so that becomes an honest majority trust assumption. You need a multisig on the other chain being like, that's the real Ethereum. So it actually doesn't really solve anything. It's a multisig bridge, right? And essentially, depending on the type of light client bridge, like this happened with Terra, with IBC, the relayers just kind of closed down, right? So you couldn't actually push through funds from Osmosis to Terra. They just like, no, not anymore. So you just kind of got stuck, right? And the other issue with the ZK light client part is ZK is hard. It's like magic math. That's what I work in ZK. Like there will definitely be hacks just based on implementation. So here's where we're at with ZK and light client bridge. The next generation, we kind of don't have to trust the relayers. There's kind of a state truth, even if it's multi-sig, for whatever that means. It's marketing. ZK bridges are marketing, essentially. And it bridges assets. Cool. But we have all these other issues that we need to fix, so how do we fix those? And again, ZK is hard. At this point, optimistic is probably better than a ZK bridge, even if a bunch of protocols are using it for marketing. So how are L2s better? Like bridging within an L2 ecosystem. And I call these the next generation of cross-chain bridges. Get it? Because L2. And here's sort of our categories of multi-chain bridges, not cross-chain, multi-chain. Is essentially a locally verified third-party L2 bridge. And that's like, honestly, Hop Exchange is the only example of this. Maybe in the future, Herodotus. If you still use like layer 0 or something from L2 to L2, it's multi-sig. Sorry. Like there's very few bridges that fit in this. Then there's the native bridges, like ZK Sync has its own bridge to the protocol, which is more trustless. And then we also have this, like you might have heard of these super chain or hyper chain of we're starting to have L3s and L4s and many L2s. So that's called fractal ZK or super chain in the case of Optimism, but they'll also use ZK. So yeah, it has to be locally verified, the third-party bridge. Most, like Orbiter Finance is not a locally verified third-party bridge. So some people ask me, like, wait, L2s are bridges? Yeah, by definition. L2s are literally defined by the bridging contract on L1. That's all they are, is a bridge with a blockchain on top of it. So here's examples of how multi-chain rollup bridges are better than cross-chain bridges. So we have this concept of chain reorgs or attacks, right? we have to come to the consensus on which is, in Bitcoin is the longest chain. In Ethereum, there's a different protocol for actually choosing whose block to take, right? And so what happens in a normal cross-chain bridge, Solana, Ethereum, if either chain is reorged or maliciously attacked, right? So the wrapped assets, like WETH on Solana, become completely worthless, right? It's completely unbacked, wreaks havoc on the ecosystem, it's bad, right? And with native assets, like if you do, let's say, Ethereum, you swap it to Solana onto a different chain, onto Solana, the LPs might lose money. And the important thing of this is like you might think that it's only assets that are actually in transport at the moment that get attacked, but it might actually become economically viable to forcefully reorg one layer over and over again and double spend over and over again until you drain the entire bridge. So what happens if the L1 reorgs, right? And this is not a bridge, this is L1. It's called probabilistic blockchains, right? If you swap, let's say, ETH to USDC, either you get your USDC or it reorgs and you're back with your ETH. That's the assumption we have for any blockchain, right? And so what happens if the if the L1 reorgs on the L2, right? Essentially, the L2 users are fine. Again, L2s are defined by their contract on L1, so if L1 reorgs, essentially L2 reorgs, right? And any native assets you're like bridging from L1 to L2 are completely fine. If the L2 reorgs, essentially you're probably fine, right? But the reality is like if there's any third-party bridges that don't use L1 as a go-between, like Arbitrum to ZK Sync, if they don't send the message through L1, it's a cross-chain bridge. So again, either the assets become unbacked or LPs lose money. And the cool part of like L2s is you can actually trigger L1 trustlessly or L2 from L1, right? And essentially, this allows you to do completely trustless L1 to L2 message passing or bridging because the L2 can check the block hash opcode and know it's the official version of Ethereum, the canonical version. And you don't need any majority trust assumptions on that. And you can also theoretically do trustless L2 to L2 bridging if it goes through L1, right? No bridge is working on that. It takes a long time. It's expensive. People like their money in seconds. So if you are building a bridge on L2s, please send it through L1, please, for the sake of everyone. Let's not make cross-chain bridges in Ethereum also. And essentially, well, that's the same thing. So some applications of this, for example, is you can make storage proofs of the state of L2 onto a different L2, right? And essentially, like you can do like cross-chain lending, for example. Let's say you lock up funds on L2. You can essentially issue a loan on L1 without ever bridging the assets actually through, right? Or Snapshot X, like it's expensive to vote on chain. So you can essentially vote on L2 and then trustlessly it can actually pass the state onto L1 and have trustless, essentially voting. So then we come to L2 plus bridges, L3s, or these sort of like super chain concept L2s, right? And again, it's the next generation of safer cross-chain bridges. That looked better when it was just L3. That made sense because 3 Ls. Doesn't make sense now. Optimism had to come and do super chain, so now it's L2 plus. Shit. So the concept of super chain, like the Optimism version, is essentially you have a bunch of L2s, but they all use the same bridge. All the funds for all of those chains are defined by exactly the same contract, right? So when you bridge from, let's say, Coinbase chain to Optimism, you're not actually bridging anything. You're updating the value on L1, so it's essentially like accounting rather than bridging, right? And essentially, this allows you to natively bridge assets from one L2 to another one without extra security assumptions. And using things like shared sequencers, longer topic, we can essentially also make that atomic and sort of solve some of the blockchain scalability issues or user experience issues of having a bunch of different chains. Also for ZK protocols, we call this like recursive ZK or marketing hyperbridges. And the idea is like you can build L3, L4, L5 on top of L2, and literally every single one of the fractals uses exactly the same circuit for bridging. So as long as the L2 circuit is safe, all of the other layers are completely safe. So you can go from like, it's not showing, like L14 to a completely random other L3 in one jump. And you don't have to sort of come down or do any fancy bridging, it's just accounting again. You mark that it's not on this L14, it's somewhere else. And so here's kind of where we're at with our L2 multi-chain world bridges. Now we fixed the weakest link problem. Essentially that means if any of these cross-chain bridges actually get hacked, any one of those chains gets hacked, you can drain the funds of literally every single chain. That's not true anymore in L2 rollups or superchain, right? We don't have wrapped asset issues or LP losses, assuming you go through L1. There's no fragmented liquidity or cross-chain MEV on the bridging point. And you can do trustless L2 plus bridges. You can keep fracturing more and more into different chains without additional security assumptions. So, but then we still have these two issues, like bridge upgrades, smart contract bugs, issues with essentially implementing the verifier contract of ZK. So how do we fix these? So here's some steps that we can take to improve any kind of bridge, whether it's cross-chain or multi-chain. So first of all, you should have a circuit breaker, right? If over 10% of your bridge's funds are bridged in a single day, freeze the protocol. And essentially that gives the team a day to figure out, am I being exploited, right? This is basic. Some bridges do it. You'd be surprised by how many bridges do not. You should have essentially a delay period for upgrades because you might have a totally safe bridge, whether it's cross-chain or essentially multi-chain, and then they upgrade it and they steal all the money, right? Like it might have worked really well for a couple years and then they come in, upgrade it, and take all of the money. So if you do a bridge upgrade, you should have a delay period of a week or 21 days that it goes into effect. If it's a critical bug that someone can actually steal the money from and that's why you're upgrading, you should freeze the bridge and then wait for the delay period and offer some sort of solution for people to claim their funds before that upgrade. There's also this sort of, on the prover level, ZK provers, again, magic math, right? We're probably gonna have issues with these. So what you can essentially do is you can have like not just ZK proofs of the state onto L1, you can have ZK proofs plus Intel SGX that runs exactly the same transactions, right? And if one of them says that there's fraudulent transactions, it just freezes the protocol, right? And this way, if Intel shares the key or the prover was implemented incorrectly, essentially no one can steal money. There's also something Togru's been working on called multi-verifier. So you have the proof, you have to verify it on L1, right? What if you implement the verifier wrong, right? So you can essentially write it in two different languages, in Solidity and Viper, and then hopefully, if they're made by different teams, if one of them breaks, the other one can freeze the protocol because it sees this was an invalid transaction. You should also have user-forced transactions. This does not work with custodial banks. You're not going to be able to call Coinbase and be like, damn it, move my money, right? It doesn't work with multi-sig bridges. It doesn't work with light clients. But you can do this on optimistic or ZK bridges, cross-chain or multi-chain. And you can definitely do this on L2s, L3s. You can essentially allow the user to force transactions on their own if the sequencers are ignoring you. And for any custodial assets, right, like USDC, Circle's already the only person or the only party that can mint or burn any USDC, right? So you're already fully trusting them. So at that point, you should implement a Circle bridge, and they're actually working on this. Actually, I think they published it. So you don't have any additional trust assumptions moving USDC from ETH to Solana because you're already trusting the protocol, so might as well let them mint and burn that direction too. And so now we've kind of fixed bridge upgrades and smart contract or prover and verifier bugs. but not really, honestly. We're never going to be able to fix these, right? Code always has bugs. Like, I don't think I've ever written a program in my life that didn't have 10 bugs in it. This is normal, right? So we just need to build these sort of mechanisms to make it really hard to hack, or if there is a bug, how do we fix it without putting the users at risk? So the point of this whole speech is, all bridges suck. They're really bad. Don't use them. Thank you, thank you. Just kidding. They do suck. They always have extra security assumptions, right? Let's not lie about this. Like, layer 0 is not inventing a new form of trusted or trustlessness. Like, let's just be honest. Let's try to improve these bridges so users actually know the risk they're taking on. And then we can slowly sort of improve these designs, right? Please practice safe bridging. You'll make Vitalik very happy. The clapping is wonderful. You want to see him happy, trust me. And for this, actually, this is a very trimmed down version. There's like a 40, 50-minute speech of this that I have that goes much more into details on all of these. I still need to record it. Usually conferences have speeches of like 25 minutes, so I'll put it online at some point. You can follow me at ZK Lumi. I'll get it up. Also at Starknet CC, I have a new speech called Scaling ETH Infinitely. And how do we scale Ethereum without essentially user experience and liquidity fragmentation? Long story short, common bridge, shared sequencers, come to Starknet CC. Maybe we solved the scaling trilemma, right? We also talked a lot about ZK. For many years, it was a very small group of us math nerds that really loved ZK. No one gave a shit. Then ZK EVM came around. Now everyone's talking ZK this, ZK that. But the only people that know ZK are cryptographers, right? Don't go ask a cryptographer how ZK works. They'll go into polynomial commitments and Fry-based recursion. This is a mostly mathless way of explaining ZK. Also, L2s have their own additional security assumptions. It's not all roses. This is a panel from ETH Gathering where we talked with different L2 teams on some of the security assumptions and how we can improve them. And then if you're going to bridge somewhere, especially cross-chain, like you should do some due diligence and not just trust marketing. L2 Beat has a great resource for this, bridge risk analysis. And you can visit it, you can open up your bridge projects and sort of read how essentially they can rug you. And that's it. You can follow me at ZK Lumi on Twitter. And I'll get all this stuff online as well, so.
Time for questions.
Or comments saying that bridges are great.
So obviously you have to bridge between chains. What is your #1 bridge?
Stay on ETH. I mean, use native bridges. Like, it might suck withdrawing for 7 days, or don't bridge much. Like, you know how much money you're willing to lose. So if you have 1,000 in the bank, maybe that safe limit is 100, and then you can use Hop Exchange or something to move it, and you won't be super depressed if you lose all your money.
Hi, Lumi. Do you have any opinion on DN-style type of bridges, where they would fall in your evaluation?
Yeah, so I'm actually very excited about DN. We got to explore them a little bit, and then we'll update the speech and let you know.
One more? No? I guess we are good. Thank you
Cheers,
so
thanks
much.
guys. Have a nice day.